Hello and welcome to a new episode of Two Wayward Writers North. I'm Rachel McCarran, talking to you from the northwest coast of England.
And I'm Luri Recono, here in the northwest coast of Borneo.
Today we're talking about writing big and small.
The long and the short of it.
The top and the bottom of it.
And everything in between. But why?
Because I was accused of being prolix. As if that wasn't shameful enough, I had to look it up because I didn't know what it meant. But I gathered from context that it wasn't good, and it meant that I rambled on too much.
But isn't that the point of us? Shouldn't we be rambling as far as we can?
Well, yeah, in terms of being wayward writers on our rambling journey, we're not sticking to the path. That's the whole point. But I think in terms of writing craft, we don't want to go off on too many tangents in our stories because, we want to keep the reader with us. So in that respect, being prolix was probably not a good thing. I didn't like the accusation.
No, I remember the specific occasion, and I do think, though, that rambling and tangents have something going for them as long as you have the reader hooked. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and so that is something we should explore today.
Yes, let's start with a definition. What does prolix mean? And then we can work out whether it's a good, bad, or indifferent thing and whether we need to avoid it. So my pocket Oxford Dictionary just says simply that prolix means lengthy and tedious. But I would argue that lengthy doesn't necessarily mean tedious. I think sometimes a longer story, an explanation, as you say, going through a tangent, going away from a linear narrative can actually be fascinating and the opposite of tedious. So lengthy doesn't necessarily mean tedious.
No, because to me too, I mean, sometimes it's the journey that counts. It's how you're getting to the destination. Once you're there, it can actually get quite tedious. The opposite of prolix is, I didn't know the word prolix before you were accused of being prolix, but I didn't know the word for the opposite either, which is what I am, which is breviloquent. And I'd just like to take a minute to savor the difference and incongruence in these two words. That prolix sounds short and clinical and almost sci-fi, Dr. Prolix and his machine, whereas breviloquent sounds sprawling and eloquent and gentle like a slow, elegant afternoon tea.
I think you should write a story about Dr. Prolix. I think that would be a really good sci-fi character. Dr. Prolix and Professor Breviloquence could go on contrasting adventures together, perhaps.
Yes. Yes, and they could meet for tea. They could have high tea.
Yes. See, okay. We've gone off on a tangent already.
I love it.
And I don't know. I'm glad that you didn't know what prolix meant either. It makes me feel a bit better about the whole thing.
It's not something that comes up in conversation. I've never heard it.
No, but I've been trying to use that word in conversation ever since.
It just sounds like a hemorrhoid cream.
And now I'm trying. Yes, it does. It sounds like a brand. Prolix B. So now I'm going to be trying to use the word breviloquent in casual conversation.
I can hardly say it. Breviloquent.
Breviloquent. No, I think that just trips off the tongue quite easily. So you feel that you're naturally breviloquent?
Yes, and I actually do know that there's a reason for that because last 10 years I've been working as an academic editor, and a very important part of that has been clients send their papers and it's 10,000 words, and the journal has said it needs to be 8,000 words, and so it becomes almost like a puzzle, like a game. How can I cut 2,000 words without losing the meaning? You go the first pass, you take out the easy bits, and then you have another pass, and you start paring it down. And it was such fun. It's fun for me, but somehow it became a habit that now I look at text and I go cut, and it's a bit too much sometimes.
Well, I've played that game with my own writing where I've been working to word counts, or indeed on my novel, which was massively too long and got cut from 120,000 to 108,000 and is now 98,000. So I've played that game, but it's interesting about academic editors because I'm currently working with an editor on my Virginia Woolf essay, which is the first faintly academic thing I've done in a very long time. The original word count was 7,000 and I submitted a respectable just over 6,500. But the editor that I'm working with now, the back and forth, she's wanting more. And it's a good 1,000 longer than I started with. So, take of that what you will.
Well, yes. I mean, she wanted more to be said, more meaning.
Yes, there's several places where she's asked for expansion and more. So it's ended up much longer than I originally conceived, which is unusual for me, being prolix as I am, and a long writer by nature. But I don't know if that's the difference between fiction and non-fiction. Maybe.
And I mean, does a Virginia Woolf need to be, let's say, gripping? I mean, people don't read it to find out what happens next. They read it to have a emotional, intellectual journey rather than who the killer is. So it's a different reader.
Yes. Although this is a work of auto theory, which is about my story as it relates to Virginia Woolf's story. So it's not quite the same. But yeah, you're right. The readers are likely to be people who are studying Virginia Woolf.
It's a different reader.
Yeah, they can probably cope with a bit more.
Not saying your essay isn't gripping. I'm sure it's extremely gripping. In fact, I've read it. It is gripping, but in a different way, in a prolix way.
No, I hope it's not tedious if we're going for the original meaning of prolix. But I suppose it depends on your viewpoint. If you're not into that kind of thing, maybe it is. But I've tried to give it a bit more of a bit of tension and a bit of story. But there you go. So I think we all probably have natural tendencies for writing big or small. And I think because of your editing work, you tend to the small, I tend to the big. We could ask ourselves, are we an overwriter or an underwriter? Or does it even depend on the project? Do we grow from something small and build it up? Or are we whittling down from a larger block, like sculpting something out of a bigger whole? I think both approaches are valid, and there's probably advantages and disadvantages to each.
Yes, I mean, when I'm writing, I tend to develop a character and a voice and then set them loose on the plot. And how many words they produce depends on who they are. So a character might, narrate every single little thought they have, and they come out quite wordy. One of my Royal Road characters really just has far too much to say. And then again, if it's someone like Alice from Bycatch, she is very breviloquent, and she only says the absolute, even less than she should, because she just ignores lots of things. That shapes then the novel. I can't force her to say any more.
I work similarly in terms of character dictating my novels. I write character-driven fiction. I work with a character and I let them tell me the story. I do have a loose plot and a loose idea, but that can go off the rails depending on whose point of view I'm writing from. And so far, my characters have not necessarily been big talkers themselves, but they've had big stories to tell, and then they think of something else that they want to tell me. And this is why I've had so many spin-off prequels and sequels, because they have lots of story to tell. I wonder how it would be if I chose a character, or if I developed a character that was a bit more to the point. I do have another character who is more to the point, but I've never actually written from her point of view. And I'm wondering if that would be an interesting exercise to do, whether, a novel from Bex's point of view would come out, much shorter than a novel from Sarah's point of view. But I don't know. In terms of a writing exercise, it's a big project, but something to think about, I think.
Yes. Speaking of big projects, you went through the experience of reading Duck's Newburyport, I believe.
Well, yes, I wrote a little blog about it as well. If you can find that on litopia.com. I was really interested in this book because it was written by a writer called Lucy Ellman, and I remember reading her novels in the 90s that were very short, quick reads, very funny, And then all of a sudden she's become sort of more famous for writing this 1,000-page book that her own publisher refused to publish because they didn't think it would sell. And she ended up publishing with the independent press,
Galley Beggar?
Galley Beggar Press, and she actually won an award with it. It was the Goldsmiths Prize, which is only awarded to experimental and quite strange novels. So it was never going to go for the Booker, but it won the Goldsmith Prize, and it basically consists of one long unbroken sentence. Well, there are some small interspersed passages, but it's basically one long sentence, which does not get a full stop until page 1003 or whatever. Nice. And it sounds daunting, but I actually loved it, and I got really addicted to it, and I was really sad when it ended. So there you go.
How long is the audiobook? Because I know you listen to audio. So how long was that?
45 hours, I think.
Nice.
So that's that's a week's work, isn't it?
Yeah,
45 hours, a full-time job for a week. Yeah, but it wasn't prolix though, because it was not tedious. Some readers may think it's prolix, or some it's not for everybody. Let's face it. But it really kept me going. I was not skipping ahead. I was not bored. I was absolutely riveted by this one sentence. So there you go.
Perfect. I've got one long sentence in Bycatch where Alice is playing around because she's writing a diary, and she plays with writing one sentence about a big wave that nearly sank the ship she's on. I'm not going to read it out because she doesn't like it much, and I'm not sure about it either. But how about you? What's your longest sentence?
Well, my longest sentence, I should have counted. I think it's 40-something words. It's in Songs for Beginners. It's a long sentence with no punctuation. I did look very carefully to see whether it needed punctuation. It actually didn't. It stands on its own. But I'm not going to read it out because it's too filthy for the podcast. And I know that your mum listens. So I'm not going to read it out.
It stands on its own.
It does stand on its own. It stands perfectly well on its own without any punctuation or other kind of assistance.
Does it stand firmly?
Very firmly. Very good. It's a robust sentence.
Extremely good. Glad to hear it.
So that's sentences, long and short. I think, we don't need to tell the listeners that a mixture of long and short generally works well and works best. But what about the long and short of it in terms of structure? Can a story be told just as effectively in less words, or sometimes is more actually more? I suppose it depends on the story.
And on the voice, as we said earlier. But
yeah, and there's the famous theory that I think it's attributed to Hemingway, whether he came up with it or not, I'm not sure, but the Iceberg Theory, where there may well be a lot bigger story underneath, as in lots of backstory and motivation, and why characters behave the way they do and why events have turned out the way they've turned out. But the reader doesn't actually need to know all of that. All they need to see is the tip of the iceberg. Yes,
and I have a few. Well, I have one issue with Iceberg Theory. In theory, I love it. I love the idea that there's things under the surface that I can't see. But it does assume that both the reader and the writer have a common base of knowledge to work from. But what if they differ in what icebergs look like? Because if you're telling, for example, a story from where I live here, like an Asian story, the underlying iceberg is going to look different from what a Western reader sees, and that keeps tripping me up. Well, I'll say something, and then a reviewer will go, well, that doesn't make sense to me. And you're like, oh, it's because you don't have this underlying iceberg of information about what it means to say such a word, or what it means to do a certain action. It means different things to both of us. So Iceberg Theory relies on a common understanding. Hemingway writing for someone like Hemingway, fine. Otherwise, stuff gets lost in translation.
I think that's a really crucial point, because part of the joy of reading fiction is to find characters and situations and places that are not familiar to us. And certainly, you know, if you've been through everything that a character has been through, and know how that feels and what led to that point, then there's not really any point in reading it. And I think sometimes the cause of the cause is important. Cause of the cause is a phrase that's used in trauma theory and helping people move past things that have happened to them and trying to identify the reasons for that. If a character or a person behaves in a certain way, it may well be because of something significant, possibly terrible, but not necessarily terrible, but something significant that's happened to them in their earlier life. It's a device that's used in fiction because, you know, there may be a story about an adult who behaves in a certain way, and there is a reason why that adult has turned out the way they have, and it is often to do with their upbringing, their childhood, whether that's abusive, whether that's you know, neglectful parenting.
Sorry, isn't that most of literary fiction?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That actual story of that motivation is interesting. It's not the bit of the iceberg that's hidden. It's the bit that the reader needs to know.
You want that iceberg to be flipped up. You want it to tip over.
Yes.
You want to go diving and see the iceberg, because
yes, you want to know why, what lies underneath that.
You want to know why they're behaving this way.
And looking at the cause of the cause, you know, if they've had a difficult upbringing, why have they had a difficult upbringing? And there's usually a reason to that. It's not just that there's a wicked stepmother or there's an absentee father, to, you know, use a couple of cliches. There will be reasons why that step parent isn't effective, because they've had their own trauma in their life. So, you know, there are layers and layers and layers, and I think it's trying to decide which layers need to be revealed and which need to be implied.
So
and iceberg theory doesn't cut that.
Well, maybe it's iceberg theory, maybe it's an updated or modified iceberg theory. So I'm on the ship, right? I'm watching an iceberg sail by, and I want to know is why that iceberg is behaving the way it does. I might actually just don some dive gear and go have a look. And the looking at the iceberg beneath is what thrills me, is what interests me. Might scare some people to go diving and look at an ancient iceberg, but for some readers, that's part of the fun. Why would I want to look at the tip floating by?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, let's rebrand iceberg theory, or rename it onion theory, because we're peeling away layers, and we need to decide how far we need to go and how much our eyes need to water.
Well, I like that. There's also Saunders research onion, which is frequently used in academic literature. Is each layer of research, and you peel it back. Hopefully not while weeping.
No, depends on the kind of novel, doesn't it? Really, how much you're going to be weeping.
Again, whatever the story is, you know.
So regardless of how far you dive to see the base of the iceberg or how much of your onion you peel, I do think it's important to avoid the tedium of prolixity, to not say the same thing twice.
Yes. However, that being said, so again, here's the difference between different contexts. Here, if you have someone like a storyteller or someone telling you something that happened, an event, this puzzled me when I first got here. They will repeat, and they'll say it again, and they'll tell you a story. Oh, such and such happened to such and such, and then they'll say it again. They'll repeat it. And at first I thought, yeah, I heard you the first time, but now I've been here 20 years and I'm totally into it. And I'll constantly repeat myself to people in the huddle, and I'm going, why am I doing this? But I think it's for emphasis. It's what did they say twice? And did they say exactly the same thing twice? Or did they say something a bit differently, like from a different perspective? And that's them telling their listener what's important in this event that happened to this some person.
I think that's really interesting about repetition for emphasis, because you see that quite a bit you see it in songs and in music, where you've got a chorus. You see that in stories for children where there is the repetition, and because kids can latch onto it and it helps them to learn and it helps them to remember.
Okay, so when I teach my kindergarten, they love repetition. If Three Little Pigs, Not by the Hair of My Chinny Chin Chin, Goldilocks, Big Bear, Middle Bear, Wee Little Bear, they will just be hooked if I'm repeating something. And I know we're not 5-year-olds, but I think there's a core of that still inside us sometimes. We just want that. Are we sure? Repetition. Yeah. Again. Yes.
I think there's a difference, though, with repetition and drawing back to things, but we also need to be careful not to say the same things over and over in different ways, sort of in the same paragraph. I think sometimes I'll read things and it's as if the writer has thought of a few different descriptions or different metaphors of the same thing, and I just sort of want them to choose one and not put them all in, because it's just overwhelming. So I don't know if you've ever come across that, but there's a saying, 1 + 1 = half. So saying something twice can have half the impact depending on how it's said.
Well, this actually brings me very nicely into sci-fi and fantasy, which is perfect for the conversation between Prolix and Breviloquence.
Epic sci-fi and fantasy tend to have much more generous word counts than, say, rom-coms, which will be probably half as long. I'm not sure I know much about either genre, but you know a lot more about epic sci-fi than I do, Laura.
Yeah, but particularly I was a big fantasy reader when I was younger, and one of my favourite series is Memory, Sorrow and Thorn by Tad Williams, and it's roughly 1 million words spread across 4 books.
Wow.
And it's there's one that I also enjoyed, although I've read less often. It's The Wheel of Time, which was made, I think, into a series on Amazon Prime. And the whole series, I've forgotten how many books it is because the author died before he finished, and then I think another author finished it for him. I think it was Brian Sanderson. And in total, it's 4 million words in length. And each book is about 300,000 words on average. And that author, Robert Jordan, he is famous for repeated things. So his characters are always making the same body movements. So one of the characters constantly tugs her braid. Characters are constantly crossing their arms under their breasts. And if you took all those out, probably be about 100,000 words less. But of course, in fantasy and sci-fi, there's no way to get all the world building, the settings, the plot, the huge casts. You can't convey them if you didn't have these word counts. If you tried to stuff all that into 70, 80,000 words, you would fail. And even now, I don't think anyone would debut with a 300,000 word doorstopper, but fantasy is expected to be at least 100,000 words.
But still, the repetition of things, you just wonder whether that could have been edited out, or is that part of the flavour of the novel?
In Robert Jordan's case, it's famous as part of the flavour, I believe. Each character has their little signature move,
quirks.
Little quirks.
Yeah. I think you wouldn't get away with that for a debut. You're absolutely right. But yeah, I know, you can see in the bookshop that the sci-fi fantasy section, the books have much bigger spines than the rest of the place. But I think there's a place for long or wider structures in literary fiction too. You've got the sprawling Bildungsroman coming of age novel back since David Copperfield, Jane Eyre, these sort of big classic coming of age novels that are structurally hefty, but not boring at all. Well, not to me anyway. Some people aren't keen on them, but they've got stories that keep the pages turning. Otherwise they wouldn't be the classics that they are.
When I was on my trawler, I had with me I had the fortune to have A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, which is just under 600,000 words, 1,300 or so pages. And it's about family, and I can't exactly remember the plot because this was 20 years ago, but it was gripping. absolutely gripping. But, and as the author says in the foreword, hard on the wrists, and he apologized for that because you have to hold this humongous book up while you're reading it.
Well, I can't really let this subject go without mentioning my favorite author, John Irving. He is sort of the master of the modern Bildungsroman, frequently beyond 600 pages. The Last Chairlift is, I think, about 900 pages. And they do keep your interest because the story just draws you in and holds you in there for the whole way. His most recent novel was significantly shorter. That came out last year, Queen Esther. I did write a review about it on the blog. But that was oddly short, only about 400 pages, which is very short for John Irving. And I was just left wanting more because you just expect a bigger book. So I think, yeah, there are certain genres that lend themselves to a bigger structure. So we've talked a lot about novels, and I think that's probably where we both come from in our fiction writing. I started writing long in novel form and only sort of came to short stories quite recently, which is a different sort of discipline. You know, it's necessarily short, and a lot of literary magazines, competitions will have strict word counts that you've got to stick to. So it's a very different kind of discipline. And despite accusations of my prolixity, I've not done too badly with short stories. I've had a few published. I've got a comfort zone of around 5,000 words. To me, that is sort of ideal to get the beginning, middle, and end and some sort of character development. But actually, my first two publications were only 2,000 each, so which was much tougher to do. I have to say I had quite a lot of help from other writers in the Litopia lab for all my stories to get them to a publishable standard. But I've had absolutely no luck with flash fiction, so 1,000 words or under, sometimes much less. And I really, really struggle with the brevity of flash, and I'm quite in awe of the writers who can do it. I don't think you've done much short stuff either, Laura, but I know you've done some.
I would struggle to write a story in flash, but I do love writing little vignettes of a character and what they're doing, but the character's already established, so it's not exactly publishable. And it's never part of the story itself. It's more for me to play around with.
I think things like that are really interesting, almost like spin-offs or bonus content, perhaps the sort of thing that, you know, might be in addition to a novel. But certainly in terms of publications that feature flash fiction, they want the whole story. They want a full arc within that short space of time, which is why it's such a difficult art form. And I'm quite in awe of people who can do it. I mean, there's some excellent flash fiction publications, but they're mostly very clear that these are not vignettes, these are not snapshots, they are full stories. But I think there's a place for that short character study. I find those sort of things really interesting. It's the sort of thing we do at our weekly writing club, isn't it? Just those, or even shorter, just a 500 word scene that's interesting in itself, but probably limited places for publication.
Yes, they're always quite fun to write, I find. But yeah, what do you do with them?
Well, I suppose we could just stick them in a blog post, which is what we've done with a few, isn't it? Quite a few of us have done that. So
we have, and they've been quite fun.
Yeah. Or maybe there's a gap in the market. You know, maybe we should start a lit mag for fragments. I don't know if there'd be a readership for it.
Well, surely our listeners would read.
Maybe, let us know.
Yeah.
So I think there is an appetite for shorter fiction. Flash fiction has become very popular in recent years, particularly online. And I think it's partly because of, you know, respect for it as an art form, but is it also to do with shorter attention spans?
Well, I spend a lot of time with kids, both my own and other people's, and I know there's sort of this attitude that kids aren't reading anymore, that they don't have an attention span. It's all TikTok and short form video. But to be honest, that's not the complete picture. If anything, I'd say all the short form content online is making kids crave the longer stuff, but it absolutely has to hook. I've been reading an insipid book with one of my students, and he was so disgusted by the end. I think I'll never get him to read anything again. But so there's one book series that my students love, and it's Warrior Cats by Erin Hunter, although Erin Hunter is actually a collective of authors. And it's almost Shakespearean in its scope. It's if you ask the student what do you like about it, and he's like, oh, it's loyalty and betrayal and blood and the alliance with the dogs and so much blood. And it's basically over 100 books, 50 of which are full length, right? And these are 10-year-olds reading them. They're sitting there before class, leafing through a thick book. And they've got stacks of books to get through. So they are reading it, but it really needs to speak to them. So I'm not a middle grade author, but if you are, read Warrior Cats. Honestly, it's one of the things to do right now.
So are the kids identifying with warrior cats? Is it because this is one of the things I sort of recall from my own teenage years, and generally with children, they want a character to identify with.
No,
are these feline characters?
They're feline characters, and they're absolute cats. They are feral cats. I think it's basically set in a sort of idyllic UK countryside, and these feral cats have clans, and there's stuff going on. There's all this stuff going on, and there's a queen, and there's murder, and there's alliances being broken. And what they like, and they honestly like, is this social stuff, right? This betrayal and murder and whether or not you team up with the dogs. And they're not identifying with the cat, but they are seeing this social shenanigans dynamics that's going on. And I know with this age, they do not like to be talked down to. They want to be taken seriously. They want to read serious literature. And Warrior Cats is serious. I mean, it's Watership Down, just cats. And a lot of middle grade books these days are just so talking down to kids and not taking them seriously, and they loses their attention.
So Warrior Cats appeals to teenagers and young people because it's about belonging and tribalism.
Absolutely, that is it with cats.
Yeah. So I think whether you write long form, short form, whether it takes you 150,000 words to tell your story or 80,000 words, one thing that I feel is really important is to be the kind of writer that you are and not who you or anyone else thinks you ought to be. It's important to be aware of your tendencies as a writer. If you're an overwriter like me, try and minimize the bad habits of potential prolixity, but harness the strengths of being able to tell a story that your characters are explaining to you. So if you can write big, write it well, and don't worry about conquering flash.
I would absolutely agree with all of that. Don't be afraid to write lots of words. They will get read if they're good.
And they can be edited down.
They can.
But
not too much.
They're not needed.
But not too much. It gets to... Don't pare it down, but yes. Don't be afraid of long word counts.
Yeah. Well, don't be afraid of long word counts depending on what you want to do with your writing, because if you're planning on sending your novel to an agent or publisher and it's your debut, your word count may stand against you if it is too long for your genre. And I don't like these conventions because I feel that a story should take however long it needs to take, but we do have to bear it in mind if we are, trying to hook an agent.
I do think for your debut, you need to behave and be a good little writer. And then once you're known and trusted, then you can go nuts.
Yeah, it's just getting over that first hurdle, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's all we've got time for this episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to get every episode freshly dropped into your feed.
If you want to join the discussion, please drop us a line. Writers need other writers, so come and join us at Litopia.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell your friends. I'm Rachel McCarran.
And I'm Laurie Ricono.
We're Two Wayward Writers, and we'll be back soon with more conversations about the curious business of writing.
love your seagulls in the background.
It's a bit of a thing round here.
Oh dear, dear.